You. Thanks for joining us, everybody, and welcome. We are here with Music is Education in our Model Legislation and Peer Networking webinar, and we're thankful for your time today. We're actually going to kick it straight off with Amanda Karhuse, the Assistant Executive Director of Advocacy and Public Policy for NAfME, the National Association for Music Education, and Jazzmone Sutton, the Senior Manager of State Advocacy and Equity. Amanda and Jazzmone, show us the brilliance of the Maestro Act.
Great, Anne. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. So we're really excited to be with you all this evening. We are, of course, members of the Music is Education Coalition, but asked if we could take the opportunity tonight to share some new resources that we have just shared publicly with the world about a week ago. So James, if you want to go to the next slide, you can go ahead and do that. So tonight, we're sharing information about our state level model legislation that we have created to help support music education advocates be proactive in their advocacy to support music and arts education at the local level. So the bill is called the Mandating Arts Education Standards Training and Resources Overall Act, or Maestro Act for short. And again, this is not a bill that has been introduced, but it's draft legislation that is going to help our advocates have these conversations with policymakers in their states. And again, to be not so reactive to things that are happening to them, but be thinking about some proactive strategies they can use to enhance arts education overall. And I should mention that when we talk about the arts, we define that to include dance, media arts, music, theater, and visual arts throughout the legislation. Next slide, please. To provide just a little background information, NAfME launched our Advocacy Leadership Initiative in early 2024, and the purpose was to strengthen our state advocacy work. And we did this with support from both the Music Man Foundation and the CMA Foundation, and we want to thank them for their continued support. But we really created the initiative to strengthen our advocacy leadership network. So these are individuals who are music educators or who are working at the district level, who are representing their state music educator, Music Education Association. We refer to them as MEAs for short, but they're representing their MEAs as part of our federal advocacy work. But many of them have been taking on more of a role in state level advocacy. And Jazzmone is going to talk a little bit more about that network in just a few minutes. So in early 2025, we contracted with Center Road Solutions, which is a boutique government relations firm here in the DC area. And we had a legislative workshop with our advocacy leadership force members, but also members of our music education policy roundtable who were in DC for the NAfME Hill Day. And we hosted this workshop to talk about state level policies that support arts education. We relied really heavily on the Arts Education Partnership's Art Scan. I think we'll put a link for that for you all in the chat. And then we had our advocates narrow down to six the main policies that they really felt would have a positive impact on arts education in their state. So the bill is meant to be very flexible and can be tailored to whatever the needs are in your state. You could introduce it as one big comprehensive piece of legislation, but it was drafted with six specific sections or titles, as we refer to it in legislative language. And each of those titles could be introduced as a standalone bill, again, depending on what the needs are in your state. As you go through the text, you'll see that the language has brackets throughout, and these are placeholders that really do need to be adjusted to reflect your state policies, the terminologies you use in your state, and your executive branch structure. And so what we mean by that is Jazzmone lives in North Carolina. They have a Department of Public Instruction, but here in Virginia, we have a Department of Education. So there's placeholders throughout the bill for you to make those adjustments as needed. And there are also endnotes throughout the bill that provide additional context and suggest some modifications to language depending on your state's political environment. You'll see even that we've suggested an alternative name if the word mandate might be problematic for some of your policymakers. I can't really remember what that alternative name was, but you can see it when you go through the text. So this slide just gives a breakdown of those various sections or titles of the bill. The first is around providing a dedicated funding stream for arts education. It's very much modeled after Prop 28 in California, and there was a bill in Massachusetts introduced last year, the Lowell-Mason Arts Education Equity Act. The next title is around establishing music education requirements for students in elementary and middle school. We also have a section around requiring at least one arts credit for high school graduation, another for the creation of diploma seals for the arts or for STEAM, which stands for science, technology, education, arts, and mathematics. And that is really meant to provide recognition for students who've completed at least 4 credits in one art discipline. There's also a section around establishing minimum arts education standards for teachers. And I will say these are the minimum standards. As we were drafting the bill and looking at policies across the state, we kind of saw what the minimum was. But again, this is flexible, and we are happy to work with advocates if you want to have something more rigorous in your state as far as the certification or licensure requirements are concerned. And then the final section of the bill would establish an arts educator workforce development grant. And it can be used for a number of allowable uses, but one of them is to provide funding to support mentoring programs and other efforts to recruit and retain arts education professionals in schools. So I'm happy to answer questions from the group, and I'm going to pass it along to Jazzmone to talk about some of the other resources that we've developed that accompany the bill and also how you can get connected to our advocacy leaders.
Thanks, Amanda. I get to share a little bit of background about the strategic plan that we have as a resource, and this is probably going to be the biggest resource next to the model legislation when it comes to this packet, as I like to call it, of resources for the Meister Act. So the strategic plan walks you step by step. And what's great in the strategic plan is that each portion of this process, there's an action item that you are going to be guided through in making sure that you are taking all of the necessary steps to make sure that this bill is being introduced. So some things can be like finding out what your legislative calendar is. How do you identify a champion? Another great resource within the strategic plan are template letters that you can send. It's talking about building coalitions and who are your partners. And it's a comprehensive document, as someone has shared, but it does walk you through all of the steps that you would need to get this bill introduced. I like to share with folks who are curious about this that it is flexible and local, that you can take it to wherever you are and you can apply it to your state or you can apply it to your local school district. The second resource is an infographic. Even if you're not ready to introduce legislation at the state level, we want you to have access to the infographic of why music education is important. And it's on the right side of the screen, but most importantly, it also comes with cited research. So it's a great thing for you to print out, have it in your classrooms, or even share it out with your administration and school board. So again, even though this is state model legislation, we also want you to be able to apply it at the local level and make sure it's flexible and meets your needs. Next slide, please. So as Amanda was talking about that in-person convening, this is a photo. I think this might be our second year of that in-person convening. And this is a group we call the Advocacy Leadership Force. They are advocate leaders within our Music Education Association, our MEAs. They meet once a month and we cover a variety of topics. Last month was January, so we covered negotiation tactics. In the fall of last year, we covered things like tailoring their message to fit whichever political power that they have at the state level. We have folks who are, hosting their first advocacy day. We have folks expanding their state level advocacy day. So if you are interested in knowing who your advocacy leadership force representative is within your state, I believe Lynn should have access to that list and she's going to put that in the chat. I highly recommend that you reach out to these advocates and ask them, are you planning on doing anything with the Maestro Act? They probably are, but some states have already started their own legislative advocacy ask, right? But we feel that this group is doing the work and being trained on a monthly basis to implement this policy at the state level, and they are a huge resource. Um, Next slide, please. Perfect. All right, so next steps. We've given you the layout of the bill. We've given you some resources on how to get started. We've given you an infographic that you can print out and put in your classroom or wherever you might be. Now, the next steps for you could also be, what is your state policy that you currently have in place? Knowing what that is, we have the art scan, a link to that. I think Lynn just put that in the chat earlier. But also something that you can tap into is any nonpartisan state education news source. Just getting a lay of the land of what education policy looks like in your state. You also want to think about connecting with other advocates. As I said, the Advocacy Leadership Force, they are identified advocacy leaders in your state that are coming to our monthly meetings. We had over half of the country represented last month in our Advocacy Leadership Force, and we usually hit a good portion of the states as well. And then you want to introduce yourself to decision makers. So we have the state education art directors. I'm going to get this agency directors of arts education. Always get those mixed up. And those are the folks who are working in your Department of Education or public instruction in charge of arts education. But also, you need to know who your own officials are. If you are, I think we have a link. If you are unfamiliar with who represent you at the state level, please go ahead and try to figure that out. We have a link for you to put in your address, your voting address, and it'll connect to who your legislators are. Introduce yourselves. We encourage folks to go ahead and make that connection before you start doing that advocacy work to build those relationships. And as I said in the strategic plan, there are template letters for you to possibly send to your legislators. And that's all I have. Yes, perfect. Okay. So we have some questions for you that are on the screen. I'll read them out to you and just kind of processing everything that you've heard today. Which of these areas of the bill appeals most to your state? How do you figure out who the decision makers are in your state? Do you already have connections with your state leaders? Do you know the representative for music or arts education at the state level? And who else would be interested in this work? Those are a lot of questions to think about. Find one that resonates with you, and you could either put it in the chat or come off mute. Or if you have questions for me or Amanda, please feel free to come off mute and ask them now.
I'll step in here and kind of look to see if there's any questions as folks are answering those. But let me ask you guys a question as we get to that point. So that there's a lot to digest here. There's a lot if you're reading the actual legislative language, if you're reading the strategic plan, which is just incredibly helpful just in general, even if you're not going to pieces of the model legislation. But as we kind of zoom out a little bit, could you talk about the importance of of the connection points, right? So there could be a music teacher that would say, "Oh, I really like this. I'm going to go forth and I'm going to try to do something with this." I would guess that that's probably not exactly what you're asking them to do. Could you talk a little about the coordinate, a little bit more actually about the coordination piece?
Yes. So, as I said earlier, the advocacy leadership folks, they have been doing this work for a number of years, and so they might already be making those connections. But also, I like to tell folks, if you're the only one that's advocating, you're already doing too much work, right? So, we talk about the strength of coalition building, and that's something that's in the strategic plan resource. The more voices you have advocating for your cause, the easier the work will be, right? So I would recommend that, again, first they might want to see who's already wanting to do this work before they try to do the work by themselves. Contact your advocacy leadership force person, contact someone within this your state Department of Education or public education and see, is there any legislation that might be out there? Also, contact your legislator and say, do you know of any information about resources for arts education? Another group that you could reach out to is maybe your state arts council or arts agency because they might be the advocating body within your state. So there are a lot of connections and touch points, but thank you for bringing that up, Mark, about not going about this by yourself. We are stronger together when we do this work. And I also want to highlight it's not just music that we can connect with, it's arts that we can connect with, right? Like it doesn't have to be a specific music ask, it can be a collective arts access ask.
Yeah, and your point about coalition building is certainly, valuable and key there. I also think it's important, and maybe you might want to expand on what I'm going to say is the context, right? Like you're probably going to find folks in your state who have been working on this for a long time or a little bit of time. There may be some context of, hey, we've tried XYZ and maybe we've been cautioned against it, or we've been told to go down this path instead. And also perhaps some pieces of the puzzle are, as you pointed out a little bit earlier, aren't always like because you've written legislation here, right? Like that would go to a member of the House or the Senate. Well, it's very possible that some of these things, as you pointed out, are going to be happen regulatory wise through your state Department of Ed or Department of Public Instruction. So it's important to find the people who have that context, and that is the beauty of the coalition building. And like to your point, like who knows? Like the sky's the limit at that point. Once you've kind of all come together. I mean, we've certainly found that in our state as we've worked with other arts disciplines. The opportunities have really opened up.
Yeah, and I totally agree about what you were saying when, someone might have said, well, we've tried this way and we found that that's not the best way. When you start doing this work, the more questions you ask, the better you get at asking questions, the more efficient your work will become. So I would highly recommend just reaching out to folks and saying, hey, what do you know? What could be done? And trying to go from there.
Yeah, for sure.
Mark, also,
We'll pull. Go
let
ahead.
me jump in here thinking about like who your advocates at the state are. And every state's different, but I know in California, we have ed committees. And I can tell you exactly who's on what ed committee and who I'm going to connect with just to lead with questions. And I do know every state is different in how you can approach this work. That's very important to note. So go on the website for your state and find out where the committees are, who your allies will be, just through an introduction before you even do the ask. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
will say too, some states do have established arts education coalitions already that are kind of doing this work, and the MEAs and some of the other arts ed discipline organizations are part of those coalitions. So that's a place to look to, sometimes just to do a Google search to find where they are. I don't think they don't have an organized website yet, but they do have an enthusiastic member in Washington State who's trying to build a network of them. So if you're interested and want to know if there is a coalition in your state, feel free to reach out to me or Jazzmone as well, and we're happy to connect you with that individual. But usually our ALF members are pretty connected to their arts coalition and would know what's already happening in the state as well.
Yeah, and I'll throw out another point. It was your areas here is workforce development, which we know is huge. In Pennsylvania, what I actually just discovered here in the last couple of months is our Council on the Arts, the state agency, is
Mhm.
actually doing some work in that space, which was not what I would have expected, would have not been the place that I would have expected to take this up. But it's wonderful to see that they're doing that. So the point there is turn over every stone, right? You don't know who might take it up, and their ability to take it up is a whole different level of entry because they're already in that state infrastructure that they can work with the Department of Ed or whatever in a piece of the puzzle. So, the language you've provided is this wonderful jumping off point, but as you've so eloquently put, it's finding those connections to what's the next jumping off point. So I'll put out one more call for any questions in the chat, and if there are none, I'll toss it back to Ann here to move on to the next part.
This is Kathy
Yeah.
Sands. I'm from Florida. I just wanted to say I agree with Ann. One of the things we do have in our state, in the state of Florida, is we have several education committees. They have K-12 appropriations in the Senate, in the House. It's very important to look at those committees because every bill is assigned to committees and they have to go through those committees. And so you really need to look at those committees, make friends with those committees, and actually make sure that you find the constituents that you have in your membership to be able to converse with them.
Yeah, excellent point. Ann, I
Yeah,
will toss it over to you.
yeah, I'm going to tag on one more thing with her. When the committee changes, and I had mentioned this last webinar, our MEA, we introduce ourselves to the ed committees. So here's our president, here's our immediate past president, et cetera, et cetera. And because we meet with the other arts education organizations for dance, theater, and visual arts, we meet twice a month with these folks in California. We kind of do that in tandem, say, hey, we're doing this, make sure you do this, so that we're always rolling in tandem together and that our ed committees at the state level don't see us as separate, but as a united group. It's really important. I would think that if you've not done that in your state, I think that's really key to the work that we get to do collectively so that all students find themselves in the arts. I mean, we like music, but we don't know if every child wants that, but they get to find their art form that expresses themselves best. Yeah. Okay, well, we are excited because now we're going to have open topics. In lieu of breakouts today, we're actually going to just bring up your topics to the front. You can see on the slide deck that we have areas that we're going to cover. And again, in lieu of breakout rooms, we're having an open forum discussion on these and/or topics that might not be listed. So we were brainstorming around the thought of questions that might fall under budget shortfalls, instructional minutes, teacher shortage, data and action, advocacy, graduation requirements, workforce readiness, including CTE, and other open topics. So this is a chance if you would like to introduce yourself, let us know where you're from, and maybe bubble up to the top. What's something that's going on in your state under those areas or a different one that you would like help with or support in? And with all these minds in this room, we're hoping to cultivate some answers and support for you.
And I'll say, Ann, even if you don't have a question, please put your name and where you're from in the chat.
Thank you.
And then let that be a way for you to want to build up some confidence to ask a question today.
In fact, let's just do that first before we even talk about the topics. Thank you. And Elijah, I just want to thank you because you did that first, man, and we're grateful that you did that.
Thank y'all so much.
Yeah.
Nice to meet y'all, by the way. I'm from Georgia.
Glad you're here.
Thank y'all.
Let's see, do we have everyone in the chat coming through? There we go. There's Lynn. A few more coming in. Thank you for typing your name in there. And thank you, Kim, for your comment about Maryland as well in the chat earlier. Okay, so we see a name and I see people are getting in there, and I want to go to, I believe it's Carissa from Colorado. She's talking about school budgets are really challenging, especially particularly in Denver. Chris, you want to give us a little bit of information, give us a little more context to that and how that's connecting with the arts. And maybe we've got some folks who can respond to that.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much for the information and conversation. So basically, we're on per pupil funding, and so Denver is getting a lot of declining enrollment. And so one of the first things to get cut is the music program at the schools. I'm in a nonprofit that we're actually trying to eliminate that problem by putting music teachers in schools and like building the program back up. But a lot of principals are just saying like, hey, we just can't afford this because of per pupil funding. We've looked at, all the different sources of funding for a school, but it's just kind of like we're caught between a rock and a hard place. So just wondering what our options are. I know that Colorado is very low on, we're one of the few states that doesn't have a requirement of arts-based data, like who's getting arts education, and we also don't have a requirement about like in elementary school you have to have music, for example. So there's a few things working against our favor, but would just love to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
Carissa, you have Title I schools in your area?
Yep, lots of them, and those are the ones that are getting the hardest hit. And
we know that Title IV funds could support
hams in the freezer
hiring. So if there are title access to Title I, that means you'd have access to Title IV funds, and that you could employ those folks. I myself, as a supervisor in San Diego, I had certain teachers that were funded by Title I funds. So that is possible.
I've asked some principals about that, and they're like, yeah, we've already used our Title IV funds. So I don't know what else to tell them or what to say.
Any other thoughts, anybody jumping in?
So I don't have a short-term thought, I have a long-term thought. And that is the reason why you don't have data gathered in Colorado is because your state legislature passed a bill that identified what courses would be required to be submitted to the state for their data gathering for the Department of Education. And I would encourage you to contact some of your leaders out there within the music and arts education community to see what could be done to actually have that legislation changed. It's the only state where there's data gathering going on where they've intentionally, well, I shouldn't say, they've intentionally identified the courses that they want, and as a result, then left out a whole bunch of content areas, including arts education. So that's certainly one of the areas that I think could help change that.
Thank you.
Carissa, have there been any active parents, any active students speaking at board meetings? Not teachers, because they want teachers talking. It looks like they're defending their program. But what about children saying what brings them to school? What joy do they get in education? And why do they attend school? Sometimes it's for music. That's ADA, by the way, right?
Yeah, I think that's a really helpful point. And I was at a meeting where a school was getting consolidated, and there were a lot of parents and kids there, but like there wasn't a lot of talk about that specifically. But I think that would be a nice ask, and we have students who we could definitely have speak up.
Yeah. And to provide some guidance with them on talking points with parents too. And I think, all you need is a couple parent leads with a parent teacher organization or parent teacher association, and getting those parents vocal, because the reality is all those parents voted for those board members in some shape or form. And local businesses, if you can gather local businesses and the cause and effect of that, I think local businesses are very important. They partake in that as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Jim? I'm going to jump in real quick, and then I know Lynn had her hand. I would also say, the reality is schools are going to have to deal with their ESSER cuts, and that money is no longer there. So one of the things I do talk about is making sure that the cuts are not disproportionately affecting music and arts education access, where they're like, oh, we have to make up this money and just slash it completely, where it should be at least somewhat equitable in the other subject areas as well. Lynn, go ahead.
Thanks. Hi, Krista. This may not be a popular solution, but I like putting sort of all ideas out there. And it's one that I actually benefited from growing up in a very rural community in upstate New York. I went to 4 different elementary schools by the time I was in 4th grade because they continued to consolidate down. But because they consolidated down, they kept all of the programs. They kept music, they kept art, they kept PE, they kept library, they kept counseling because it is in some ways a numbers game. And I know it can be really hard to let go of your community school, but if a community school is about all of these opportunities and ways that students can engage, it's not really your community school if the school is left standing, but all the programs are gone. And it can be a tough conversation, but sometimes that is an approach that might work. Sorry to put that out there, but
No,
it can be helpful.
It's okay. I've been kind of going down that thought train, and yeah, it's hard, but yeah, we do want those programs. I like how you said.
Thank you. James Doherty, you want to give us your thoughts? Because this is brilliant. This is important.
Sure. So James Doherty here. I've been retired for a year and a half now, but my last position was similar to Ann as a district arts specialist. And I was able to crack open that door about federal funding through learning a lot from the associate superintendent about how the whole federal funding process works in a school district. And even though it might vary from state to state or district to district, it's very similar, I think. And that is around this time of year, January or February, conversations begin at the district level about what they're going to apply for federal funding for the next year. All school districts have to put together a federal funding request, and it comes in different formats for each state. And then the state Department of Ed or public instruction is going to divvy out those federal funds that come to the state. So every school district has to come up with a plan about how they're going to use the money. Most teachers in schools that are high poverty or Title I schools have completed a needs assessment at the end of the year, and probably you've done it and may not have realized it. There's some survey you got that asks different questions about what the needs are in the school. But the very best way to become a part of that process is to ask to serve on a district committee. Can I be a part of the needs assessment planning for federal funds for next year at the school or district level? The one thing that's very interesting and different in federal funds, Title I schools have to do a needs assessment every year. Schools that receive Title IV funds don't have to do it every year. I think it's every 3 years that they have to do it. They could do it every year if they wanted to, and if they really want great data, they should do it every year. But if you haven't seen a needs assessment for Title I or Title IV, I'd ask your district folks, could I see the needs assessment from last year? And then after you've seen it, then you'll know if there's any music or arts questions. If you want to get the money, you have to ask the question that's going to get the data to get you the money. So if you ask a question that's something like, 100% of our students have access to instruments or high quality instruction, or you could fill in the blank about what you want to be there. And if you know the data is going to say no, 80% of the kids don't have this, then you have data that backs up a request to put in the narrative for the federal funds. And that's how you're going to get that allocation. But the work to get money next year starts now. So when a principal tells you we've already used our money, they're telling you the truth. They're just not giving you that next step that says, well, if we want to use this next year, you need to get on this committee or do this work now so that the request can come in the summer. They have to have those requests typically, I think, like in June or July, so that when money is allocated in the next fiscal year, they'll get it. I know that was a lengthy response. I hope it's helpful. But the key is the needs assessment, truly, to cracking the door to get in there and get your foot in.
And get that key parent or those key parents in there. James, that also made me think of in California, again, I'm qualifying it, it's different by state, but we have to have a school site council in every school, and they vote on where the money is going. So what council exists at the school level where you can have key arts parents in there. We either had, when I was teaching high school, we either had a music parent or we had a theater parent on there because we both spent a lot of money. So we wanted to make sure that one of us had a key parent on that committee that could advocate for all arts in some shape or form at the school site level, so that they would be able to then push it forward to the district level.
And the only thing I'll add to James's helpful comments is that Congress did just pass the funding bill for the upcoming school year, the 2026-27 school year. So still delayed, but much sooner than they passed a bill last year at this time. And it did include some assurances. So states should expect to get their allocations and know how much Title I, Title II, Title IV funding they're receiving to get that information to districts in the spring, and that the money will go out on time this year. So I'm hoping that that is really going to improve some things from, what we were hearing. I think it was Shape America, who's the health and physical ed teachers, just told me, they're hearing there's no professional development money at all. Teachers can't go to any conferences. And I said, well, I think that was some of their reaction to what was going on last summer when funds were being withheld and were being reviewed. And I said, but we have assurances that the money's going to go out this time. So I'm hoping that that will improve things. And then there was a slight increase for Title I, but Title II and Title IV-A both are level funded, which really in this political environment is a huge win for arts education. So we were pleased to see that.
And Amanda, I'm just reposting what you had posted, that the number of toolkits about
yes.
that. Just put that in the chat.
Yes. So we just updated all those resources last year. We did have a guidance letter come out from the U.S. Department of Education in fall of 2024, reminding districts that these funds can be used to support music and arts education. I think there are some district leaders and state leaders who that was not so clear because the definition can kind of be buried in federal law, but they put out some guidance sharing that it is an allowable use of funds and sharing some examples of how it's being used. And then we do surveys as well, and our survey results will come out in March about how schools have used these funds to support their programs.
Thank you. Quite a bit on funding and support. I hope that helps, Carissa. Keep us posted. We'd love to hear how things roll out there.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Do we have other topics that want to bring up that we'd like to talk about? What's bubbling up to the top in your state? Things that are showing in your school or school district? Marcia Neal.
Okay, I'll unmute myself now. I'm sorry we got home late and my hubby, you got to hear him talk about putting stuff in the freezer. Sorry about that.
Going to dinner at your house. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's crazy here, but okay. But at least it's 76 degrees. What can I say? All right. I did want to say, however, we're having something within the last 24 hours that's happened here. And it's just amazing that it would happen here. But anyway, the superintendent gave a state of the state address earlier this week, and our new superintendent in Clark County, and our funding is going to be diminished because we're a very high Latino district, very high, and in the 40s and high 40s, and a number of our Latino students stopped coming to school. For obvious reasons. They're afraid that their parents won't be there when they get home or one thing or another. As a result, because they've stopped coming to school, it's anticipated that they will not be coming back to school in the fall. And therefore, attendance, which is, difficult anyway, we're all having attendance issues, is going to go even further down. And as a result, what has happened is some principals have already decided that gee, if we cut programs that aren't required beyond STEM, for example, this would be a way that I can keep numbers for my faculty. And it's kind of getting out there that one middle school program and one high school program may be gone. And I'm like, what? In this district, which is not lost a program that I can think of ever. So I don't know if anybody else is experiencing that. Or anything similar to that as a result of your particular demographic. I mean, it's been pretty severe here. So fewer students enrolled is fewer money coming from the state, of course.
Marcia, it makes you ask, if they could pull the attendance data on the students in those music classes, those arts classes, and see what it is comparatively to those who are not in those classes, that they may be cutting the classes or actually getting kids to school.
Totally. I agree with that. That's a good point, Ann. I definitely will do that. I don't know that we'd have that, but we could probably, I'll talk. I'm working with the music supervisor. I sent him an email or a text message last night at about 9:30 and said, hey, did you hear this? So we're on top of it, but that's a really good point.
Anyone else want to brainstorm here?
Is that happening? Okay, go ahead, Bob.
And I think it's not directly related to it, but at least with some research, you can show, the chronic absenteeism work that's been done that shows that students who are in the arts, have a lower chronic absenteeism rate. Now, that wasn't related to the topic of the day that we're dealing with, but at least it gives you something to show us that, hey, these are the type of programs that help bring students to school. In many instances, it's the reason that they stay in school. So, I think beginning to cut those programs actually drives them further away from coming back to school.
And so, interestingly enough, the schools that I've heard about so far, are not schools with high Latino enrollment. Our high Latino enrollments, which have mariachi programs, and they're like teaching 400 and 500 kids in a school. They're not being touched because I think the thought is, where are we going to put all those kids? Who would deal with that? But so I definitely have to just start, digging down and starting to see what's the issue and, how can we deal with it?
Well, and the biggest bang for the buck, as you just said, if you have 65 students in an ensemble class, that's going to take 2 teachers somewhere else to try and cover those.
Yeah.
That ratio is so different. Jazzmone, you have a hand?
Just an idea, or maybe a wondering. Okay, this might be really hairy and audacious, but why not? If your district is seeing that, my wondering is, yeah, there we go, the BHAG. Thanks, Bob. Um, if your district is experiencing the same thing that similar districts are, what is the likelihood of a larger education funding coalition, like just all education groups coming together and asking the state legislature for like a stopgap amendment on maintaining the funding levels from the previous year, knowing that students are, you would have to get data, right, that say they are afraid of coming to school, they're hesitant, like they would come to school if they knew they were safe, doing all of that research on the back end, but not just doing music, but just overall student attendance, and then going to the state legislature and saying, hey, look, we recognize this is where we are. Can we hold on the levels for what, 25, 26? For 26, 27.
We did that with the pandemic, Jazzmone.
Yeah, the same. Yeah, exactly. So it's not necessarily new. It's just a different issue with a kind of a new wrapping for a solution.
I just wonder if they're even aware or even talking about the cause. You see, I'm thinking that right now principals are just kind of that nobody wants to say it's because you could get really smacked big time. But I know that's the cause. The teachers know it's the cause and everybody knows it's the cause, but you cannot come out and just flat out say, hey, because ICE is threatening these people, we need to blah 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 because
what parent could say that?
I don't know that anybody could or would want to. It's a little scary right now.
Very.
But I think that that's where the coalition of a larger education group could come in and say something, whether you want to identify it or find someone who can find that language to identify it, is saying, we know the kids are here, we're just not able to have them safely come to school for whatever reason.
I think my first step is, because this has all just happened pretty recently within the last, couple day or two. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to contact some of my members of Congress because, I've been going to see them for years and I know a lot of them. They went to my high school when I was teaching there, so I can go to them and say, hey, look, our programs, and you know this school and this school, you know these schools. The
Right.
principals have already said they're going to eliminate this, this, and this. What's going to go on here? And then, of course, I'm going to work with the music supervisor and tell him that I can be the mouth that he isn't because I'm the community now.
Right. Thinking about
So-
that coalition that Jazzmone was talking about, how do you bring people together? I know in
Mhm.
some districts they'll take all of the PTA or PTO presidents from every school site and they will meet in a
Right.
separate meeting. And those individual parent leaders might be able to come together as well as back that.
And I've often found here in this district anyway, once the parents get really up, and we've had to do it several times, they totally back down. Totally back down. But again, see, if it's happening really quiet where one principal's doing it and nobody else knows, blah, blah, blah. So I'm just going to have to get in there and find out what really is happening and what programs are being threatened and all that kind of stuff. So, but I'm just mentioning it because I don't know if anybody else is having to deal with that. And if they do, I'd be happy to talk with you offline about, some ideas in addition. So
Well,
we're
if it's
just
not
at the
now, it
beginning.
If it's not now, it might be later, Marcia, right? Things.
Yeah,
sorted,
right. I mean, I'm thinking about like Los Angeles, and I'm thinking about maybe down in Florida,
Yeah.
because we're we're D
Arizona,
states,
absolutely.
and
Yeah.
and I'm kind of our states may find something totally different. I don't know, but
Lynn put a comment in the chat. Is it possible to teach the students virtually and still count as enrollment? Could they do kind of they did in the pandemic?
what a good idea. Yeah, that's a great idea. Yep. Thank you, Lynn.
So sorry, Marcia. Oh my goodness. Can't even imagine.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts coming up to the top? A new topic? Or a continuation for what you've heard today?
Well, if you think of anything, let me know.
You bet. Thanks, Marcia. No other thoughts? Budgets are perfect everywhere. I can see that. Any graduation concerns, requirements, changes in requirements at the state level? Elijah, did you want to say something?
Hold on 1 second. Wait. My mic. Hold on. Come on. Hold on 1 second. 1 second, y'all.
I'm going to bring up Carissa's comment from the chat that said she heard that through the grapevine that Minneapolis schools are setting up for
Come
virtual
on.
for this. I've not heard that. Thank you for sharing that.
I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry about that. My computer was acting slow. Can y'all hear me?
Gotcha, Elijah. Go for it.
So I'm a college student at Morris Brown College. I'm majoring in music production right now because my school, I'm actually a transfer student from Albany State University in Georgia. They had music education as a major, and I initially took my music education courses over there, so I have a lot of credits for music education that was their curriculum. However, I transferred because I don't live in Albany, Georgia. I live in Atlanta. So I transferred to Morris Brown College, which I am at right now. But however, they do not have music education as a major. And I am trying to be a music educator. I'm trying to teach in the school system. I mostly want to do band, but I can do orchestra also. I took conducting and things like that. So my question is regarding that. I was told that there's tests that you have to take, standardized test, various states. I think we have one in Georgia, and it's called the GACE. So I was wondering about that. Like, what is like, is it required? And you have to take. So if I was in Georgia, but I wanted to teach in California, so I would have to, if I passed the test, the certification test in Georgia, would that be valid in California to teach?
It actually wouldn't be, but there are some states that do have reciprocity with one and another. So Lynn Tuttle in the chat just put a link that you could explore, and you can see what states have reciprocity with others, what additional coursework you might have to take, and see where your next steps could be. But we're happy to help you. Check out that link And at the end of the webinar, if you would like to hang out for a minute, one of us can hang out with you and guide you even further. We're thrilled you want to be a music educator, Elijah. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
You bet. Check out that link and then hang out at the end of the webinar. Okay?
Gotcha.
Okay, everybody. We're going to close out of our share outs right now and our topics and breakout themes, if you will. And now we're going to do some celebrations. And Jazzmone is going to take us through these great celebrations. They're challenges, but at the same time, we want to lift up and recognize all the wonderful things that are happening at the same time, because two things can be true at the same time.
Exactly. Two things can be true at the same time. As I shared earlier, there are a couple of states that are having their legislative day. Iowa's legislative day is slipping my brain at the moment. However, I do know Wisconsin just did their advocacy week and it was all virtual. Oregon is doing theirs in a couple of weeks. I know there are some that are doing it during the month of February, but because March is Music in Our Schools Month, I highly recommend that you check out your state's Music Education Association and see if they are having any sort of advocacy day in, yay, Indiana is later this month. Thanks, Bob. To see if they're having any sort of advocacy day during the month of March, which is Music in Our Schools Month. And also check and see if there's any sort of digital campaign that you can participate in. Because we do offer a platform to advocates to contact their state legislators directly through what we call a quorum platform. So check out your state MEA for any advocacy days, along with like your state council, art council groups. They also have advocacy days as well. There is a PD bill. We're going to celebrate this, a professional development bill in Missouri that was introduced earlier in January. And this bill is going to provide professional development for 6 sites for teachers in rural areas of Missouri. They will provide training throughout the state in 6 different locations, and the state will fund those training days for those music educators. Right now, it's a pilot program, and they hope to have success in this pilot program and then expand it to the other art forms. So, but right now, it is, I think it just went to the House Education Committee late last month, late January. I keep forgetting that it's February. And then lastly, Virginia introduced a fine arts seal for their students. It's going through a process right now, and we are excited to see that our advocates in Virginia are working on that. Oh, I'm looking at the chat really quick. It keeps popping up. There's a lot of stuff in the chat. This is great. Florida has the seal and we're introducing legislation to provide acceleration. That's great. Yay. And then lastly, there was a big education bill that came out of Mississippi that would impact music and arts education negatively. And we just heard that that bill has died in the Senate. So congratulations to those advocates. But if you have any advocacy celebrations, I know those are all state level, but there are advocacy wins happening in your communities and classrooms all over the nation. So we'd love to hear from you. So please share out. I renewed my teacher's license. Yay! Good job.
All right. Yeah, Jazzmone, thanks for all of that. We want to end on a positive note. So we're going to end with just a couple of housekeeping things for you to think about. So you've heard a lot about ways to take some action. And as Jazzmone said, it's already February, but we're still in that new year mode. And, if you go back to our webinar from last month, which you can access at the Music is Education website, we talked a lot about what to be looking for in these state of the state addresses when budgets are being presented. We remind you of that to go back and take a look at those things, to watch for some of the things that we talked about, and also be watching for any new laws that are posted that would impact music and arts education. I'm going to turn it over to Bob Morrison here because we've talked a lot about the Carl B chatbot that is at Music is Education. There's a bit of an update there, Bob.
Yeah, so we continue to add new information to the knowledge base that drives the chatbot. And just for a quick primer, what we do is there's a gated knowledge base that's been curated by many of the members of the Music as Education Coalition with some of the best information that we have access to support advocacy efforts at the state and local level. And we actually just added some new material into that, including, how to monitor the school budget process and what's involved in that process. So it gives you a sample timeline. Every community is going to be, or every state or community may be a little bit different, but it has all of the high points of, what's the process, what's involved, how do you get engaged, how do you engage with your school board members. So that type of information that will be helpful for those that want to have an influence on what's happening with the school budgets, particularly as the budget cycles become more and more challenging these days. And additionally, we're always looking for new information to put inside of that knowledge base, but it's not restricted to the knowledge base. And what I mean by that is it will go to the knowledge base first for the answer because we have that, curated information. But it will ask you if it doesn't have the information for a particular query, if you want it to go out and search for other resources. And that then will trigger the tool to then go out and look for other resources. So we've been really pleased with the level of engagement, the creative ways that people have been using this advocacy AI tool. So I would encourage all of you to take a look, kick the tires, test it out. And it may be helpful for you when you find yourself in an advocacy pinch and you can't get an advocacy leader on the phone to help you. This chatbot has been designed to actually be your advocacy assistant to help walk you through some of the processes and challenges that you may be facing in your own local school district. So give it a whirl.
All right, absolutely. Thanks, Bob. It is an incredible tool, and it's awesome to hear how it continues to grow as you're adding to the knowledge base. So thank you for that. Couple of next steps and calls to action. We're not going to ask you to answer these here, but we want you to answer them for yourselves and think about these things. There was a lot of information today, a lot of things to think about. We want to make sure that we're always doing something, that you're always taking something back and trying to do it in your state and your community. So what can you do based on what you learned today? And we know there was a lot of very specific to-dos, but I think there might be some broad ones that you also have ideas from. And how can you find ways to use that model legislation in your advocacy work? Really go in and take a look at it, particularly the strategic plan. I think you will find a lot of ways that you can take from that pieces that will work for you and work for things in your state. So that's your homework to go and do. We want to thank you all for joining us on the Music as Education webinar this month. We will be back again in March on Tuesday, March 3rd. There is the link with the QR code that will also be available at musicaseducation.org. And while you're at musicaseducation.org, check out the resources that are there, including previous webinars and Carl B, as we just discussed, and subscribe to the Music as Education account on YouTube so you'll see when these webinars are uploaded. And then finally, we just wanted to thank the folks who are part of the Music as Education Coalition who helped to make this happen today. All of these folks were involved in some way, and a particular note of thanks to Music for All and Dr. James Weaver for handling the behind-the-scenes technology, which is important as well. So thank you all for being with us. We hope that you can join us in March, and please spread the word to your friends about musicaseducation.org and how they can join our future webinars. Have a great night, everybody.